Yes, you can be
Okay.
heard.
Okay, great. Well, let's get started in the interest of time then. Um, yeah, so I often use the term Ru philosophy or Ruism when I'm speaking with a group of philosophers who focus on Chinese philosophy. I went with Confucianism for this more general audience, but in any case, um, yes, within contemporary academic study of Ru or Confucian philosophy. The status of Tian, the Chinese word for heaven or heavens, has attracted a great deal of attention in recent years. Um, while in um, for a while in 20th century English language scholarship, a steady mainstream consensus was advanced by scholars led by David L. Hall and Roger T. Ames, amongst others, with this pair in particular maintaining that Tien is in some way immanent and coextensive with the natural world and not transcendent, according to the definition that A is transcendent with respect to B if the existence, meaning, or import of B cannot be fully accounted for without recourse to A, but the reverse is not true. However, this rejection of transcendence in Confucianism has been under attack by scholars like Wang Shizhang, who hold that some manner of transcendence best characterizes the tradition. And I'm going to go with I'm going to be a defender of the view of Hall and Ames, so I'm going to offer some modifications. Um, Yeah, and more particularly, I believe it's unnecessary to look into the element of process in Confucianism, particularly the thinkers Mencius and Xunzi. So, Confucianism is called Confucianism in English language discourse, but this is a little bit misleading. Yeah, it's about advising more generally. Confucius isn't lionized per se. And when it comes to what we're talking about in the main text attributed to Confucius, the Analects, we don't really get too much from him to settle whether or not Confucian thinking is characterized by immanence or transcendence. He says in passage 513, we can learn from the master's cultural refinements but do not hear him discourse on subjects such as our natural disposition, Xing, and the way of Tian Dao. And most of what I present here is going to be about these two terms, Xing, human nature or disposition, and Tian, meaning the heavens. Um, so, despite the unwillingness of Master Kong, or who we know as Confucius, to speak explicitly about human nature or the heavens during his lifetime, which is 551 to 479 BCE, his later followers, Mencius or Mengzi in Chinese and Xunzi, devote much of their attention to these topics, with the former doing so roughly a century and a half after Confucius, and the latter a further 60 or 70 years after that. Um, indeed, this term "xing," which many often translate as human nature or tendency, is the basis of much a debate between these two Confucian luminaries. Inelegantly rendered, the rancor is about whether or not human tendency is good or evil, and also by extension, whether our supposedly good human nature emerges from the heavens, from Tian, which are imminent in human affairs, or are ostensibly bad natures because of a separation between humanity and a transcendent heavens. Um, of course, this philosophical dispute, which still survives to this day, couldn't sustain itself on the meager vocabulary that this rough formulation suggests. The shortcomings of conventional English language terminology hinder proper translation of the debate, or even really posing of the debate. This is kind of an English language thing. You don't really see so much within Chinese scholarship, except in reaction to kind of linguistic imperialism of English scholarship. In any case, it's necessary to clarify some of what's going on with Tian, the heavens, which may not be transcendental or immanent, before moving on to Mencius and Xunzi and their positions on human nature, each of which is defined in terms of the heavens and thus sheds light on the issue of immanence and transcendence in classical Confucianism. Um, I think, pardon me, I might have my stuff a little bit out of order here. Please bear with me. I'm going to have to jump around here just a little bit. Um, Tien highlights natural tendency in terms of mereology, which is, say, the relationship of part and whole. The Shuo and Jiezi defines the classical Chinese lexicon. This defines the heavens or Tien as the highest from one and great. Nothing about this or canonical pre-Confucian literature indicates clearly that Tian is immanent or transcendental in the sense of some creative entity or principle standing above and apart from creation. To wit, the common words with the Tian character, just that, pretty darn common, and not all that grandiose or indicative of anything particularly transcendental. Such words include tianqi, which is the basic word for weather. The words yesterday, today, and tomorrow, 昨天, 今天, and 明天, respectively, and tianxia, which is an antiquated term for China, featured at the end of the 2002 film Hero, but which literally means all under the sky or all under heaven. That is the known world from a Chinese civilizational perspective. And so it'll be shown that the most famous and immediate followers of Confucius and the classical tradition take this term Tian, which I will most often render as the heavens, just kind of deferring to the pluralistic sensibilities of Chinese thought. But we could also read this as the sky, or more simply, what's above, and construe it in terms of the human earthly realm. But I'm going to go for with the term heavens for the time being, simply for rhetorical expressibility and clarity. In any case, how then do these followers, Mencius and Xunzi, deal with this term, and what does it have to say about the possibility of transcendence being an early feature of Confucian thinking? Okay, so I jump around my presentation here a little bit. First, going to look at Mencius, and even though Confucius doesn't assign value to human tendency, his follower Mencius certainly does. After Confucius, Mencius stands as the second major figure of Confucianism, and he elaborates and extends Confucius's aphoristic sayings with more substantial anecdotal reasoning, as well as his own conceptual contributions, roughly 150 years after Confucius's initial activity around 500 BCE. One of the major contributions that Mencius brings is his dictum, "Xing Shan," or human nature is good. The first part of this phrase, "xing," refers to the native living sheng, heart, mind, xin, indicated by the two parts of the character. It is important to note that according to Mencius, xing is not a static matter of what's given at birth. It has more to do with qualitative cultural tendencies that differentiate humans from animals, including our ability to build the kinds of institutions that cultivate humanity after birth. All of that is our human nature for Mencius. So within Mencius's corpus, Xing comes to the fore in his conversations with Gaozi. Most of these conversations, his rhetorical opponent Gaozi offers up what Mencius eventually dismisses as naive views on human tendency. Pardon me, I'm jumping around here a little bit. Please forgive me. I rewrote this last night and didn't have time to fully adjust the presentation to coordinate with the new text. In any case, passages 6a1 and 6a2 of the Mencius text have Gaozi compare human tendency to a carver's stalk of willow wood and to water, respectively. In the first case, he casts human tendency as something to be hewn and eventually overcome in one's moral education. In the second passage, Gaozi puts forward that water shows no preference for east and west, or east or west, with the implication being that human tendency needs channeling and some force to get it to go in a good direction. In both instances, human nature is cast as some passive prime matter in need of some active imposition of form in order to uh, 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 yeah, some imposition of form, and that's a conclusion that Mencius can't allow. So Gaozi's remarks, these lead to a rebuke from Mencius, and because this kind of external effort on human nature contradicts the basic premise that human nature is good. For Mencius, proper conduct doesn't come about through chipping away at a person. Rather than prune human tendency down, Mencius argues that it should blossom unimpeded. In describing his flood-like qi, using this term that Professor Kalmanson detailed for us, Mencius exhorts nourishing it with integrity and placing no obstacle in its path, such that it fills the space between heaven and earth. That's passage 2a2 of the Mencius text. Um, and this may indicate a separation between humanity and heavenly realms, and thus a space for transcendence in Mencius's influential account. However, as will be shown, this would overlook Mencius's emphasis on process when it comes to human nature and intertwined human development from that nature. Though passage 2a2 doesn't speak about seeing per se, this principle guides Mencius's approach to the subject in his refutations of Gautza. Passage 6a1 takes a negative route, pointing out to Gautza that his woodworker's approach to morality, beyond placing an obstacle before human tendency, mutilates it in a way that will lead to ruin. Passage 6a2, meanwhile, regarding the water imagery, meanwhile, shows that humanity, like water, has its own impetus for movement, with progress toward moral ascent being similar to how water seeks the ground below. Deviations when water rises or humans go afoul are for Mencius merely circumstantial. And so this leaves the impression, mixing metaphors a little bit, as Mencius himself does, that human goodness is like some seed that will flower. The potential merely requires time and a lack of meddling to become actual, and along with some preparation of the ground. In any case, this emphasis on overall process means that Mencius's actual position on seeing on human nature is a bit more complicated than human nature is good. It might be better to say that becoming good is our nature. Well, how so? As previously mentioned on its own, the term for nature here, seeing for human nature, signifies the signifier, combines the signifiers for heart, mind, seen, and birthing, sheng. And thus its etymology indicates something having to do with natural disposition. However, this description is somewhat lacking in light of how Mencius addresses not just Xing, but also modifications of the term, Ben Xing and Tian Xing. Um, so Bun takes the tree character Mu and adds a signifier to its base, thereby making its meaning root. As appended to Xing, um, Bun doesn't refer to roots as self-same static entities, but rather to the growth or sheng as taking root. In classical Chinese, there's a tendency to a certain flexibility between nouns and verbs, and where a lot of nouns are better construed as verbing. So it's not just the root, but the growing of from the root or taking root. And in any case, relating these terms, Analects, passage 1.2, the classical text from Confucius, holds that exemplary persons concentrate their efforts on the root bun, for the root having taken hold, the way, Tao, will grow therefrom. Um, pardon me. Okay. Um, This conceptual background informs Mencius's belief that it's folly to describe humans in terms of some blank medium. Rather, oh, pardon me. Rather, the horticultural imagery highlights environmental responsiveness and the import of context in our basic tendencies. Uh, it's thus that this term Tien becomes a point of contention in the generations after Confucius within the more well-known debate around seeing or human nature. Um, Mencius's specific mention of Tien Xing further further removes Xing from any concept of individuated pre-birth potential, where for him Tian Xing functions as a sort of complement to Ben Xing. Both heavenly nature and root nature are included within nature, within our human nature, Ren Xing, more generally. The former just addresses tendency from the ground up, as it were. The interface of Tien and Ben, greater nature and root nature. Here we see a growth and the expression of tendency in general in Mencius's thinking, which Shun says we'll see will dispute. In any case, in Mencius's take on human tendency and human potential, it's important to note his concern with both root tendency, native and a tendency for broader environmental interaction and growth, which is part of that nature, not separate from. Now, pardon me, excuse me as I jump around a little bit here. Um, okay, yeah. So the term Shan, which is part of this notion that human nature is good, is a little bit more complex. And this further sheds light on how Mencius regards the continuity between humanity and the heavens. This term Shan, um, oh gosh, pardon me. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to just go off the presentation for a little bit and just go verbally. In any case, the term Shan goes beyond the more contemporary word, common contemporary word for good, how, like the greeting ni hao, are you well? Roger Ames holds that Shan is relational in a way that does not really fit well with the essentializing quality of the common translation good. And it's more like being good at or adept at in a way that connotes aesthetic achievement. And what does this human adeptness consist then? There is for Mencius a type of spontaneity akin to water flowing downhill that marks human moral sense, compelling action in the hypothetical scenario of seeing a child drowning. Mencius likewise stresses the spontaneity of family relations, which in turn build up normative civic communities and the development of culture. And so Mencius sees the key Confucian virtues or sprouts of human being, yi, zhe, ren, and li, appropriateness, humane conduct, enactive knowledge, and ritual propriety, each as good and natural outgrowths of the human heart mind growing like limbs. Uh, Furthermore, there's the naturalistic explanation offered by Mencius, where the rituals concerning mourning, and thus a certain sense concerning ritual more generally, grow out of basic emotional reactions that occur upon seeing what happens to corpses when left unattended. We tend to bury them, and then from there, more ornate funerary rituals come into, are developed. And this is particularly the case when we're talking about one's own kin, that impulse to funerary care. These remarks have the effect of casting funeral rituals and really Li and ritual propriety in general as something natural that arises from imminent human relations, is not as and not as something imposed from without by some transcendental factor. This indicates a common aversion, an aversion common in classical Chinese thought generally, and Confucianism specifically, to deprecating the human domain in favor of some other realm above and beyond from which goodness might enter into human life. However, even with that said, it must be admitted that Mencius's remarks on ritual vis-a-vis self and communal cultivation of human nature are somewhat limited in depth and breadth, especially when compared to his later critic, Xunzi. It is true that Mencius enjoys a much more prominent role within the Confucian tradition in general, particularly with the canonical endorsement of Zhu Xi centuries later. And this makes sense upon consideration of how his optimistic view of human nature might prove more attractive when compared to Xunzi, especially as the latter's view has been condemned as pessimistic and has been connected, rightly or wrongly, to some of the authoritarian ills of China's history. In any case, to sum up what's going on with Mencius, um, with um, Mencius out of these two figures is going to be the figure who's probably most amenable to a process reading that places Tien within the unfolding of human nature as the completion and spontaneous unfolding of our root nature, all within a single process. Um, we do get remarks about flood-like chi filling the space between human and divine, but it's important to note that for Mencius, the artifice, the cultural institutions that allow us to develop and to flourish and to fill that space between the human and the divine are part of our humanity. They're not separate from the humanity. It's something that unfolds spontaneously, as said. But what about Mencius's foil, Xunzi? Might the pathway that he charts on the other fork of the road regarding human nature in relation to the heavens be more clearly supportive of the claim that classical Confucianism includes transcendence in the manner denied by Hall and Ames? So Shunza stands on the other side of this debate, um, and he's working in the third century BCE, or sorry, fourth century. Yeah, yeah, BCE, some 60 years after Mencius. He takes up the former's language of Xing and gives laudable emphasis to ritual, human nature, and the role of the heavens. Um, no, okay. Um, However, this emphasis comes at the expense of a uh, um, what is often a controversial idea regarding human nature. And it's one that he champions explicitly against Mencius in holding that human nature is bad or evil, seeing ugh. And I really love this phrase, seeing ugh. It's so onomatopoetic that our human nature, our xing, is ugh. And we'll get into what that means in just a little bit. But in any case, Mencius, or sorry, Shunsa, um, repeatedly stresses that our human nature is like rough wood in need of a pressboard form. Um, Pardon me. Yeah. Uh, However, unlike Mencius, he doesn't employ the term for species differentiation. Mencius is trying to chart what makes us different than animals. Instead, Shunza is using this term "xing" to refer to what is common to each and every human, from the most lowly person to the most dissolute person, to the most noble and sagacious. Um, so, um, Shunza defines what for him are two, um, pardon me, I'm having to jump over my presentation here. Excuse me. He defines these two major factors of human life, Xing, human nature, and its complement, Wei, or artifice, respectively describing the former term for human nature as beginning root material, and the latter term for artifice as flourishing discourse, with the former being detestable and the latter being admirable and good. Xing thus stands in contradistinction to Wei. Xing is inner, including what is there at birth. Wei and its goodness is outer, encompassing external morality, codes of conduct, social standards and practices, and self-cultivation. So as Xing is to Wei, matter is to form, roughly speaking. On this basis, um, Shunzi rather boldly declares that human nature is detestable and that good only comes through willful exertion, through artifice. When culture flourishes with the correct figure of the sage, or sorry, with the correcting figure of the sage, all parts of way, ritual music, and the correct use of language all affect and transform inborn natural desires. And it is in such an environment that we see deference and Shunzi's model of social harmony. What makes Xing detestable for Shunzi is not that it's evil in the sense of a Christian rejection of the flesh as sinful. Rather, for Shunzi, Xing is detestable because, like Aristotelian prime matter, it is undefined and degenerate, a kind of dumb avarice, uh, groping for survival in a Hobbes-like state of nature that lacks governance in the imposition of outer form. And so, what for Mencius are four shoots growing spontaneously out of the human heart mind are for Shunza goods which must be imposed from without if people are to stand a chance of becoming properly human. Hence, Shunza's notion of human nature um, develops in part as a reaction against the role of Tien as immanent in human affairs in the manner described by Mencius. But does this mean that Shunza should be construed as endorsing some manner of transcendence? So chapter 17 of the Shunsa is largely is in large part devoted to clearly marking off the heavens as distinct from the domain of human activity. Uh, Shunsa further denies in passage 822 the role of Tianxing in human progress. Um, he reacts against Mencius for not understanding these boundaries properly and letting Tien and humanity dissolve into indistinct concepts. Um, Shunsa though does not relate the heavens to human tendency through a oh, sorry, he does rather relate human tendency uh, to the heavens through a repudiation of Tianxing, excluding any sort of convergence between the heavens and our human nature in his definition. Uh, in the passage 822, Xunzi examines how accumulation of earth and water builds mountains and seas, much as a sage amasses social goods. Many passages of Xunzi, notably 2312, firmly connect such accumulation with acquired nature, artifice, way, and attendant notions of ritual and morality, thereby indicating that all these terms are external. Um, and Shunzai 22 goes on to specifically deny the idea that Tianqing has anything to do with human development and the emergence of sages, the superlative figure in Confucianism. That's supposed to belong to a separate domain of human artifice and acquired character. Thus, for Shunzi, it is clear not only that Tian is distinct from human culture and nature, but that it has only a limited connection to Xing through the gift of our most basic capabilities, though not in any way that aids social progress in a way that could be called good. And
James,
so,
hey,
yes,
you have 5 minutes. If you,
yes. So, basically what we get at the end is a seeming conflict on human nature, with the latter holding that with Shunzi holding that it's bad and Mencius holding that it's good. But when we delve into things that these accounts aren't all that inconsistent. So for Mencius, human nature is in process. For Shunzi, it's maybe a bit more of the uh, of a static and native quality. For Mencius, it's the acorn, the mighty oak, and all intervening stages. For Shunz, it's simply the acorn. Um, for Mencius, human nature is part of a holism where natural meets the socially artificial. For Shunz, art and artifice are external and not part of Xing. Put another way, um, uh, Qing era scholar Dai Jian identifies the main issue and the debate between them is having to do with the scope of this term, and that leads to their different characterizations as being of human nature being variously good or bad. Schunz is talking about what's held in common in the sense of a lowest common denominator, while Mencius is looking for differentiation of the human species, particularly in terms of our tendency to develop cultures and institutions. In any case, the particular way in which Shunzi understands seeing our human nature ends up uh, being, oh, sorry, uh, just trying to hurry up in the interest of time. I'm probably going to go 2 minutes late, but I'll be pretty close. Um, and um, so with these authors, they both pose humanity as needing to fill a gap between it and the heavens. We have Mencius in the flood-like chi passage 282, and Shunsa arguing that a superlative sage is needed to connect and align these two realms of heaven and earth. To some, these passages indicate a transcendent understanding of Tian in classical Confucianism in opposition to Hall and Ames, though Mencius's approach clearly emphasizes the emergence of ritual culture from intimate human relations. And I want to turn to Wang Shik Zhang ever so briefly. I wanted initially to get into another author, Mark Csikszentmihalyi, and his reading of Mencius, but I'll just speak very briefly about Professor Wang and his reading of Xunzi, from which he argues that transcendence is a feature of classical Confucianism. Um, and um, in particular, he says his main point in his argument is that it's logically impossible for Xunzi to deny the distinction between the area of transcendence and what is transcended. And he says that the Chinese notion of xing must be interpreted as going beyond and being differentiated from the physical embodiments as human beings. And my response, ever so briefly, to Zhang is first to argue that he misleadingly presents transcendence as the existence of non-physical reality, when the target at the that he lays out at the beginning of his article is supposed to be Hall and Ames's claim that Confucianism does not deal with transcendence in their definitional sense, where A is transcendent to B if the existence, meaning, or import of B cannot be fully accounted for without recourse to A, but the reverse is not true. Um, that what we have is ultimately a situation, and I'm going to go try to wrap up as quickly as possible, that is perhaps a little bit better addressed by Brooks Zipporah, who argues that some modification is needed to the term transcendence, partially because of an assumption that Hall and Ames smuggle into that definition that assumes an absolute separability between transcendence in the strong sense and interdependence. Um, what Zipporah talks about here, I'm going to try to capture with this Chinese notion that there aren't just four cardinal directions, but typically we'd say there are five directions. There's the north, south, east, west, and middle, where the middle gives other directions their bearing and relates them to each other. A fifth element, a virtual element, emerges from and transcends those particulars, though not in a way that stands apart uh, from them. So, as Zipporah says, that virtual element does not really pre-exist other component parts and has only a virtual existence, but at the same time is their controller in the sense that their behavior and determinate identities are derivable from their relation to this virtual center. It does not belong to a separate ontological realm, being itself merely a certain fact about the two poles. That is a way of describing their relationship to each other. And so, what I want to offer by way of conclusion in my reading of Mencius and Shunza, and it's an abbreviated conclusion, I admit, is that human existence is possible with a full account is possible only with recourse to the heavens that center us, in line with the first part of Ames's definition, but where the heavens are also inexplicable without the human element, that central element. Um, so it's a kind of mitigated transcendence where part of Ames's definition, the first part is true, but not that reversibility, the portion that we see, here with the reverse being true. So Tianzo understood might not be so important as it is above us as the heavens, independently from humanity, but as the sky that we all see and that centers all of us in dependent relation to it and to each other. When human nature is drawn out and cultivated, we build the cultural institutions that Confucians like Mencius and Xunzi see as key to growing and deepening those relations. We don't ascend in some manner to a heavenly realm that otherwise transcends us. Instead, so understood, we converge upon that center and draw closer to Tian and the way of Tian, Tian Dao, or perhaps more simply Dao, the way, that emerges from human relations, imminently transcendent in the world before us. So with that, I offer the partial defense of a mitigated, imminent reading of classical Confucianism rests. Thank you very much for your time.